Well, good morning everybody and welcome to this morning's devotion. We continue in the Psalms. And I wonder if you've discovered something about the Psalms already that many people over centuries have known. And that is that the Psalms speak to the human emotions and to God's answer to humanity's struggles. There's a sense in which the Psalms are the medicine chest for the soul. And so as we come to Psalm 10 this morning, we expect that it will do us some good and will teach us something about the great physician. So anyway, let's come to look at Psalm 10 this morning. And if we're thinking about what the theme or the emotion that Psalm 10 is addressing, I think you discover that the theme is something like abandonment, and the emotion is the emotion of disillusionment or despair, because this psalmist is in a tough time. They feel like God is far away and everything is broken. Or to quote another pseudo-psalmist, the sweet dreams and flying machines are in pieces on the ground. All the things that I'd hoped for, it's now trouble that has come. The dreams are dashed. And this guy has sought the Lord, but it's like God's bailed. And it's like, well, you best look down upon me now, Jesus. You've got to help me make a stand. You've got to see me through another day. Only problem, verse 1, why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? And see, that's the problem, isn't it? It's like, God, you've messed up. You were meant to be here and you're gone. Stop hiding in times of trouble. But the psalm is actually saying, yeah, sometimes that happens. You're in a time of trouble and God doesn't whip you out of it. You're in it. You're in it for a season. And it feels like God's not there. And if he was, wouldn't he whip you out? But he doesn't. See, Psalm 10 knows the experience that there are times where we have to walk by faith and not by sight. When Spurgeon reflects on this psalm, he says, if we are carried in the arms of God over every stream, where would the trial and where would the experience which trouble is meant to teach us? See, David comes and he's troubled. He's troubled by the issues of the world, about the inhumanity that humanity has toward each other. There's such wickedness of wicked people at work. Look at verse 2. In his arrogance, the wicked man hunts down the weak who are caught up in the schemes that he devises. See, this psalm's saying, who's in charge, really? And the atheist might say, well, no one is in charge. The deist might turn around and say, well, look, God might have been, but he's got it all running and now he's gone. And the humanist will say, well, look, we'll take on the job and we're in charge. And the first part of Psalm 10 really shows you what that looks like. Humanity in charge without God, verses 1 to 11. And the second part of the psalm is God's answer to that. The reality of the God who is there, verses 12 to 18. So we're going to look at that briefly this morning. Humanity without God, part 1, verses 1 to 11. And what do you discover that humanity's like without God? Well, they're full of self-love. So there's no humility, instead there's pride. The psalmist knows, and in fact Proverbs tells you that pride leads to disgrace. He reviles the Lord, verse 3. He rejects his laws, verse 5. He says, no room for God, in verse 4. It's like there's a room, there's a chair in the room, and who's going to get the chair? Well, I'm going to get the chair, is what this person says. And what about everyone else? Couldn't give a rip. What about God? Still couldn't give a rip. Second thing you notice in verse 5 is that they embrace prosperity. And the idea of prosperity isn't so much the problem. The idea of having things, it's that they embrace it. In fact, prosperity is all that they have. Look at verse 5. It's this idea that that's all that they have got and nothing else. And when that's gone, they've got nothing else. So there's this idea that the wicked person has about ownership and prospering, that this is mine and I don't give it to anyone else and share it and I never have to give it back. Rather than thinking about things being on loan or leased to you, that this is something that God has gifted you and now I get to invest it for him. Not only is that their problem, verse 6, they misplace their security. Listen to verse 6. They say to themselves, nothing will ever shake me. And he swears, no one will ever do me any harm. And it just sounds like such a lovely way to sing through life, isn't it? I mean, nothing will shake me. I'll never have any trouble. I'm always going to be happy. The only problem with that song is it's a myth. It vanishes. And our world knows this more than it's known it for a long, long time. That even if you had all of the prosperity in the world and you thought nothing will ever shake me, you are shaking. And if you thought I will never have any trouble, today you've got trouble. I'm always going to be happy. No, you won't. The doctor's diagnosis, the bank balance, the employment statistic, whatever it will be, those things go. It is a misplaced security in verse 6. Listen to verse 7 onwards. It says, his mouth is full of lies and threats. Trouble and evil are under his tongue. He lies in wait near the villages. From ambush he murders the innocent. His eyes watch in secret for his victims. Like a lion in cover, he lies in wait. He lies in wait to catch the helpless. And he catches the helpless. And he drags them off in his net. His victims are crushed. They collapse. They fall under his strength. And he says to himself, God will never notice. He covers his face and he never ever sees. And that's what he thinks. Such cruelty, such arrogance, such pride, such misplaced security. And I'll get away with it all because God's got his eyes covered. He's absent. But notice, that isn't true. And so this part of the psalm finishes and the second part begins in verse 12, where you see the reality of the God who is there. And what do you notice about this God who is there? Well, thankfully, you can call out to him. You can cry out like the psalmist does in verse 12. Arise, Lord. Arise and lift your hand. If your hands are covering your eyes, God, lift them up and see. Don't forget the helpless. And so here this psalmist comes and he cries and asks questions. And the questions are great. Why does the wicked revile God? And why does he say to himself, he won't call me to account? But know this, God is a God who is present. Look at verse 14. It tells you that God sees the distressed. We need to know, like this psalmist knows, that God knows. In verse 15, you see that this same God settles the account. It's a graphic image, this, in verse 15. It says, break the arm of the wicked man. It's saying, God's saying, you are the one who will immobilize the wicked, break their arms, stop them, and he does. There will be justice. The psalmist knows it because that is what God is like. Now, we might have to wait for justice. We might even have to wait till the kingdom that comes in order to see accounts fully reconciled. And know this, verse 16, he also is the one who sits on the throne. The Lord is the king forever and ever. Nations will perish from his land, but not the king. He reigns forever. And remember that we have an even better understanding of this because there was a king who wore a crown of thorns. He understood what it was to be distressed and helpless, yet he was the one that brought justice to this world, and he's now enthroned, and not with a crown of thorns, but with a crown of glory forever and ever. Like the psalm says, he will never perish. But notice also verse 17, he saves. He's the God who comes to the needy and rescues them. Of course, that'll be a problem if you're full of pride or you're prosperous, because you won't think you're needy. Only now, events of this world tell us we're needy. And Psalm 10 is a diagnostic for your life. And it's saying to you, you need God. When we are despondent, when we are feeling abandoned, he is there and he is near and he saves the needy. God bless.